Hey, this is Sean Pickett. I'm the founder and CEO of Sales Integrity, a B2B tech sales coach, and your host for the Sales Integrity Podcast. I'm ready to make it another great podcast today. And with that, let's get today's episode rocking and rolling. Welcome back to the Sales Integrity Podcast. I'm real excited to interview today's guest, Mike Shelah. Mike, are you ready to share some wisdom with Sales Integrity Nation today?
Heck yes, Sean. Let's do it.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. All right. So first and foremost, I always open up with the same kind of mantra, which is nobody can introduce themselves better than themselves. You know your background, your experience, and what you could share with our Sales Integrity Nation here, our audience of listeners, as we call them. And so if you could start off by introducing yourself, a little bit about your background, your story, leading you up to what you're doing today and how you're serving the sales profession today. Why don't we just start there? That would be great.
Sure. My name is Mike Shelah, and I have been in sales my entire adult life. I got my first sales job in 1996, right after graduating from college. And I got into technology sales in 1999. I spent 17 years in telecom, working for almost every company that you can think of. I started out with Allegiance Telecom, selling services, so telephone, internet access. I got into the equipment side. I sold Nortel, Avaya. And my last company, I actually got to learn a lot of the IT aspects. So I did cloud selling. I did managed services, pro services, threat analysis. Spent a long time in that space. And I started Mike Shelah Consulting because I found that I was getting really good and get in front of the right decision makers by leveraging LinkedIn. And I started having more and more people say, well, yeah, Mike, how'd you get that deal? And I'm like, well, it was LinkedIn. They said, well, how'd you do that? And after a while, I said, I really should start charging money for this because it's valuable. And that's how Mike Shelah Consulting started. I've been at it now about 2.5 years, and it's a lot of fun.
That's great. We're going to talk a little bit more about what you're doing at Mike Shelah Consulting. We're going to talk a little bit more about LinkedIn, social selling, all the good hot topics that we will typically discuss with our guests when we're interviewing them. But first, I like to start with my first question that I leverage with all my guests. As you know, I named my company Sales Integrity. Mm-hmm. And the name of the podcast is the Sales Integrity Podcast. So I always start off with this very first question, which is, how do you define sales integrity, or what it means for a sales professional to sell with integrity?
My very first sales job right out of college was with the Combined Insurance Company of America. And some of you have heard of that, some of you haven't. They're actually a massive company with tens of thousands of employees. They don't advertise. Mm-hmm. And they put you through some pretty rigorous sales training. And one of the mantras was, do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And I think that's what integrity in selling is, that you may come across someone that you could sell, but the question is, should you sell? Mm-hmm. Is it best for the customer? I prefer to sell to customers that it is a direct benefit for them rather than the allure of the cash.
Yeah, that's great. So do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And it's not, if you can sell them, it's should you sell them, and it needs to have a direct benefit for the customer. That's awesome. So as you can tell, I like to take copious notes as I learn from my guests here. So very good, very good. I appreciate that. That's a great start. So there's some, before the podcast, we had a previous conversation, mm-hmm. and I took some notes then, and there were some key topics that I wanted to make sure I covered with you today. First one, why don't we start with emotional intelligence? There's a lot of talk out there about emotional intelligence. There's some good books. There's not a ton of them on selling as it relates to emotional intelligence, but there's a handful of real good ones, but not a ton. As people are learning more about this topic, it relates to selling and service and all that good stuff. So I would love to get your take, Mike, on the definition of emotional intelligence, and more specifically, how can sales professionals understand more about this, leverage it, and make it a better experience for both them and their prospects' customers?
Sure. And as I said in our conversation, I stumbled into emotional intelligence. I was hired for a speaking gig to do my LinkedIn training, and the client asked me if there was another subject I could talk about. and emotional intelligence came up, and they said, great, do that. I'm like, okay, I've got 6 months to figure out this subject. And I read probably a dozen books on it. And if you break it down to its simplest piece, emotional intelligence is recognizing that every one of us has a content filter. And that filter's been developing since the day we were born.
Mm-hmm.
And it's how we perceive the world. And that content filter is there largely to protect us. You know, don't eat that, it'll make you sick. Do eat that because it tastes good. But it's much more elaborate than that. And unfortunately, we do a lot of things automatically because of our content filters.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can learn to allow the experience, whatever the experience is, to pass through that content filter and take the time to allow your brain to assimilate the information instead of the bias of the content filter, it allows you to be much more effective in reacting to that specific experience. And for a salesperson, wow, that really is the essence of good selling. So often we will hear a quote unquote buying sign.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when the verbal vomit begins. we get that moment where they're saying, yes, I want to buy. We go, well, let me tell you about why I'm awesome. And that's the exact moment to stop and say to the client, let me make sure I understand what you just told me. And you do 2 things there. First, you make sure that you understand what they just told you. And 2, you validate the customer. The customer feels like this person really wants to help me. They don't want to just sell me something. Yeah. That's emotional intelligence in my experience and from what I have seen, and why I think every salesperson needs to dive into the subject with both feet and get hip deep and really just embrace it.
Yeah. So it's really understanding how your emotions affect your ability to communicate, and more specifically, listen and ask the right questions and do what's in the best interest of your customer. And so not allowing your emotions to drive the verbal vomit cycle, as you were referring to it. So if you keep your emotions in check, you understand how that could affect, especially as eager professionals that we are in the sales realm, you know, where we want to sell and close and all that good stuff. Understanding how your emotions drive your decision making on how you're going to communicate is a good first step, it sounds like.
Yeah, and in addition to that, what is the emotional temperature of the client?
Mm-hmm.
We've all been in front of a client where the meeting felt like a dead fish.
Yeah.
You walk out, you're like, oh, that went awful. And you get back to the office and there's an email waiting for you that says, Mike, thank you for coming in today. We really enjoyed the presentation and we're looking forward to next steps. And you go, what just happened?
Yeah.
You in that scenario, you were picking up on the wrong signals. You're again, your content filter was letting certain things pass through and it was trapping others. And because of that, your blind spot prevented you from actually seeing the results.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of that could be handled through careful preparation. We have a mantra here at Sales Integrity that we teach all of our sales professionals, and we call it Make Your Sales Pop. That's very familiar for our listeners. POP being an acronym: preparation, organization, productivity. Preparation leads to an organized discussion. Organized discussions lead to productive use of time and into the next steps, right? And eventually helping you, increase sales and earn more money, help more customers. So, when it comes to emotional intelligence, sounds like, again, all roads could lead back to preparation. If you carefully prepare your questions and you're prepared for that discussion, the dialogue you're going to have with your prospective customer, you might come at it, from a non-emotional perspective, ask some questions up front, and you would understand what's important to them and what's not. So you're not executing upon the verbal vomit cycle, right? And you do understand that you met the mark and not getting back to your office and looking at your email going, wow, I guess that did go well. So it's the difference between, prospecting on accident or selling on accident and prospecting or selling on purpose. Be purpose-driven in your approach, especially as it relates to emotional intelligence.
And I think I love what you just said. There's one other thing that a lot of salespeople won't necessarily think of is making that smart disqualifying statement early, because there's nothing more frustrating than going through 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings and ultimately finding out that your solution really doesn't solve their problem, or maybe it solves 20% of the problem. So what you should have done is bring in a business partner or 2 or 3 to give the customer a whole solution, because yeah, your solution's nice, but it only solves 20% of their problem, and there are other vendors out there that showed a full 100% solution that resonated with them.
Yeah, I love that. So make a smart disqualification question early. Have that ready early. So to put you on the spot a little bit, and I know it's a loaded question because everybody's products, services, solutions are a little bit different, but put it in your business. You know, Mike, Shelah Consulting, right? So what would be an example, just so our audience can kind of connect the dots here, of a smart disqualification question? Just a simple example if you've got one at the ready.
Sure, I'll have somebody ask me what my rate is, and I tell them, and they say to me, well, that's a lot of money. And my response is, well, the question you have to ask yourself is, what's the value of one new customer to you? Mm-hmm. Is it $1,000? Is it $2,000? Is it $3,000? You know, salespeople are commission based. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you get a salary, but when you close that deal, you usually get a commission on top. And my question is, okay, so let's say your average customer, because some are bigger, some are small. Let's say your average customer is worth $1,000 to you in your pocket. Is making the financial investment to use Mike Shelah Consulting and give me 90 minutes of your time, is that worth $1,000? Will I, for my fee and my time, translate to at least one new client for you in the year? And I can't answer that for you. I confidently believe that I will. Mm-hmm. But if you as the customer don't believe that, that's okay. Yeah. But you have to understand that, and you have to feel good about that, because I don't want to waste your time.
Yeah, and for our audience, that's a great example. Thanks for elaborating on that, Mike. So for our audience, is really kind of the lesson you can learn here is it's all about value, right? And so if you're going in and you prepared, obviously you were prepared, and that's happened to you many, many times. So the first step is, if you're hearing objections and common rebuttals or responses from your prospects that are blocking you from moving forward, you know, you should sit down and document that and think through what is logical messaging. And really the connecting the dots is get it back to value. Map what you provide to value that they're seeking. So when they do object, or they do throw out a disqualification signal based on like price in this example, then you're ready to respond with something as eloquent as Mike just outlined. And with that, you say it confidently because you've prepared it and you believe in it. If you believe you're adding that value, my time, spending time with me, with Mike Shelah, is going to net you at least one new client. Do you think from what you've learned from me, you're going to at least go out and net one new client from our time? So if that's the case, then look at the value. What you're investing in me is this, and what you're getting is this, right? So does that make sense to you? And then if it doesn't, that's a great disqualification cycle that you just went through, because they're just someone who either gets it or doesn't get it. In that case, they don't get it. You only want to work with people that get it. This could be extrapolated to selling complex technical, product, services, solutions. No matter how long the sales cycles, how many complexities associated with it, there are disqualifications questions you can ask along the way. So just think through that and prepare those. Thank you very much for elaborating on that, Mike. I think that was a great example.
Yep.
All right, well, let's move on from emotional intelligence to what a lot of our audience, a lot of the sales professionals I'm sure you work with, and I know that I work with, are focused on, which is generating leads, building sales pipeline. Because the more opportunities you have, the more opportunities to win and put yourself in a position to win more business, the more commission, the more income, and the more everybody's successful. So let's shift our focus a little bit to sales pipeline or sales funnel. Right? You and I talked about this a little bit. Now, you hear this all the time, and this is kind of a fun little topic in my opinion. Is it a sales funnel? Is it a sales pipeline? Are there both? Do they work together? Are they just the same, just a different moniker for the same thing? So I'd love to hear your perspective on sales funnel versus sales pipeline. What's the difference, and when should you focus on one versus the other?
Sure. I'm going to frame this from the LinkedIn perspective because it'll be a good concrete example.
Good.
I have a little over 4,000 connections in my LinkedIn network. That's basically a funnel. Now, you are in my LinkedIn network. You are probably not going to move into my pipeline. You are somebody that I know. You're a colleague. The rest of the people in there could very well be. And that's a funnel. A funnel is someone that you has identified as the possibility to be a client. Maybe that's job title, maybe that's their industry, maybe that's the product. But you don't know a whole lot more than that, other than you sell this widget to this type of person at this company, and they fit that criteria. That's a funnel in its very simplest case. Your pipeline is someone that you have spoken to that has said, you know what? I am open to the idea of discussing that product or that service with you because my business may have a need for it. And that really is the difference. And on the one hand, your funnel can be anybody, but that's not really true. Your funnel really does have some mild criteria. Usually it's title, usually it's industry, usually it's company size. You know, I worked for a company a few years ago where I wasn't allowed to talk to businesses that had less than 1,000 employees or less than 10 locations.
Yeah.
So that set my funnel. Now, Bob Smith, the CIO of XYZ company, which has 10 locations in Baltimore, he's still in my funnel because I've not spoken to him yet. The moment I speak to Bob, and he says, well, you know what, Mike, we actually are considering that for 2018. Then he moves into my funnel. And then you set the first meeting, and then you move him through the funnel. You either, again, quickly disqualify, or you move him through the process to understand his needs, understand your products, how they position towards each other, and then ultimately move towards a signed contract.
Yeah. So funnel is your target audience, and that's who you're going to market against in some form or fashion. You're reaching out to them, but they're not yet a qualified opportunity, even at the lowest level, right? So it might be just leads, of your target market that you're going to address, to try and warm them up and initiate that initial dialogue, whether email, phone, in person, wherever that may have occurred, where you've identified, hey, there's something here for us to discuss and work on in terms of a qualified opportunity to work together. And we're going to go through, now it gets into your sales pipeline because it's identified, you had a conversation, and now it's going to go through your step-by-step sales process or cycle, or leading them through the customer evaluation journey or customer buying journey, as some call it, right? So that's kind of the distinguishing factor between the two. Would you agree with that? Did I summarize that the right way from what you're saying? Yep. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about funnel, because when it comes to funnel, you have a target audience. You definitely need to define it, right? Here's my ideal client profile. It could be size of companies. It could be the specific roles you're going to go after. And there might even be some indicators that, buying indicators that they would be a good target for us, if you will. So let's say you work all that out. And now you know where they are, right? And now there's different methods to go out there and create awareness and capture their attention, right? And so this is where I'm going to shift the discussion a little bit to social selling, because it's a nice dovetail into the topic. A lot of stats and research out there, most of them summarize that buyers in today's social selling world are roughly 2/3. There's different stats, give or take, above or below that, but 2/3 through their buying journey, their evaluation journey, before they raise their hand and engage with a sales professional. There's also other stats and research that shows that on average, the average customer evaluated 5 pieces of content before they purchased, from a company sales professional as well. So given that, social selling seems to be the hot topic all these days. That's a great way to kind of guide someone through your funnel, to getting them from at the top of the funnel where it's very broad and maybe they're not even aware of you, to you're creating awareness through these touch points. Let's call it these 5 content pieces, and maybe touching them, leveraging social selling is one way. There's other methods, but we're going to shift to social selling here to where they raise their hand. They're 2/3 of the way through. Maybe that's at the bottom part of that funnel before they get into your pipeline, right? So can you talk a little bit about social selling, because you're focused in LinkedIn, you leverage LinkedIn quite a bit. You've outlined some uses of LinkedIn here. Love to dive deep a little bit. Social technologies like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, but let's focus on LinkedIn first. This has taken the selling scene by storm. A lot of people are focused on social selling and LinkedIn in our B2B world. Can you shed some light on LinkedIn, why LinkedIn, and your viewpoint on social selling? That'd be great.
I'll give you a great example, because you made a very interesting point that they're 2/3 of the way the process through before they engage you. Well, here's the thing. If they've engaged you as the salesperson, you have almost no chance of winning, because they've got a good idea who they want to buy it from. And they're doing their due diligence and bringing in vendor 2, vendor 3, maybe even vendor 4. So you have a 25 to 33% chance of winning that deal, unless you just wow the heck out of them, which, it happens sometimes. The leading dog, for whatever reason, botches up the presentation and you present something they hadn't thought of. Those things happen. But if they're reaching out to you, mostly you're lost. What the big thing that I do with LinkedIn in particular is I teach Connect and Cultivate. And I'll give you a great example. I was at a networking event several years ago, and I meet this gentleman. He's the president of the networking organization I was at. And he also owns a small business. He's a general contractor. Shake his hand, make friends with him. So I connected. And then I cultivate that relationship over the time. I see him mentioned in the news, so I reach out to him and congratulate him. I have a friend looking for a job. He would meet well for that friend's company, so I introduced the 2 of them. So I've built up some credibility with this gentleman, Wayne. And then here in Baltimore, we have the Baltimore Business Journal. I believe Texas has one in Dallas. They might have one in as well. But most major cities have a business journal.
Yep.
And here in Baltimore, the BBJ featured an article about a local bank, Howard Bank. Now, you folks haven't heard of it across the country, but in Maryland, they're kind of a big deal now. They were originally maybe 6, 7 branches, and they get this press release that they're going to buy other banks, they're going to open new branches organically, and they're going to double their revenue to north of $1 billion. That's pretty aggressive. And for those of you that are in technology sales, that spells opportunity. With that kind of rapid growth and rapid scale, regardless of where you are in the tech sector, there's a spot for you to fill. And the article featured the president of the bank. I look her up on LinkedIn, and she knows my friend Wayne. I reach out to Wayne and said, Wayne, would you mind introducing me to Mary Ann? Saw the article about her in the journal today. I think there's a real opportunity for us to help one another. And Wayne immediately responds and says, Mike, I'm not going to introduce you to Mary Ann, but I am going to introduce you to the project manager that I do all my work for their bank for. From that introduction to my first contract with them took under 60 days. That first contract was $9,000 a month in revenue, and I grew it to $22,000 a month over a span of a year and a half. And that's, in essence, that's social selling. You connect and you cultivate relationships so that when you need to tap someone on the shoulder and ask them for help, it happens. And that's largely how you and I met. We connected through a mutual friend, cultivated the relationship with a great phone call about sales, and you said, you know what, I think this guy would be great for my audience. I think they get some value out of him. So now I'm on your show.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So this is social selling personified,
Yes.
leveraging LinkedIn and specifically from that perspective. But great example. I mean, that is a tangible one. I think a lot of the challenge, there's a lot of social selling pundits out there that are focused on social selling only, right? Like you don't do anything else, put some valuable content, connect, and like and post comments underneath people's stuff, and then leads are going to rain out of the sky, right? Just sit back and wait. And to me, that's dangerous advice. I think social selling is very important. You better get on the train or you're going to get run over by it. So you better learn more about it as a sales professional, especially in our B2B, tech world, if you will. But the example you gave, a couple things that I gleaned from what you just outlined. One is, and I'm a big proponent of this all the time, is that you got to be proactive, right? So if a client reaches out to you, or prospect reaches out to you, they engage you, is the language that I used, right? Then you're going to be at a disadvantage. So you can leverage social, because you can bet your bottom dollar that, when they're evaluating, or even if you reach out to them, let's say you do it all cold, for those that are on the other side of the spectrum of all cold calling and relationships and no social, you could bet your bottom dollar they're going to go to LinkedIn, they're going to research you, they're going to go type you into Google, and they're going to research you, right? And so you better make sure you have a good profile, and what you kind of set the narrative on what's out there in the social networks, but also just out there in general in a Google search. And we don't have enough time to go into it's the stuff you probably teach, I teach as well, and how you can do that and set the narrative, if you will. But that's one aspect of it. The other part is be proactive. You can leverage that and being proactive to connect first, but then the cultivate part, I think, is the most important, because the connection is the easiest part, really. Right. I mean, you'd have to really be trying to screw that up, try hard to screw that up, right? Just don't be creepy. Don't, just make sure you follow up when people connect you in a timely manner, all that good stuff. But it's the cultivate that's the difficult part, because that's the follow through. The follow up is, I immediately recognized that I was had an introduction facilitated, or I reached out to you, connected, and that's okay. I'm going to follow up with you. We're connected. But after that, the follow through is the cultivation. That's where a lot of people drop the ball. So that's another great lesson. But what I love most about what you just walked through is you mapped it all the way from cold, outreach, social selling. Here's a specific use case example, all the way to tangible value, tangible business benefit. In this case for you, 60-day sales cycle, a little bit less, 9,000 monthly recurring to start, grew up to 22,000 in a year and a half time frame, right? Yep. So those are real examples. So the challenge a lot of people have when they're skeptical of social selling is, I hear a lot of people talking about it, but is anybody really getting business out of this, right? And you just gave a great example of yes, and you connected all the dots. I've seen this multiple times over in my own business. The answer is a resounding yes, but I don't think people who know me would say, wow, he's a huge social selling connoisseur, or pounding the table on that. I advocate a well-balanced approach, a mix of proactive and reactive, and a balanced approach of social selling, strategic networking, systematic sales messaging through the combo approach of email and phone use. And then the pinnacle of all that, all roads lead back to referrals, getting facilitated intros, right? So you're doing all these things to really leverage a network, cultivate these relationships. So you're getting facilitated introductions. The only way you're going to continue to receive those is if you're facilitating introductions. So it's the old Zig Ziglar approach. You help enough other people get what they want in life, you in turn will get what you want. So I literally gleaned all that from what you just walked through, that one use case example. You can tell I'm excited about, you gave a very tangible example of how that was beneficial to you. And obviously your customer wouldn't keep working with you for this duration, and they wouldn't keep raising that investment in you if you weren't producing results. So it goes without saying, all parties here involved are winning in this scenario.
Yeah, and it's one of my favorite stories, but I'm happy to say I have a bunch like that. And you touched on a couple of good things. I think a lot of salespeople out there are kind of like a baby with a bazooka. Nothing good can come of that. They're taking these random shots.
That's right.
Trying to make things happen. And a lot of the LinkedIn experts out there, and there's a lot of them. I get people that say to me all the time, oh, so you're a marketer. I'm like, no, I'm not a marketer.
Yeah.
I'm a sales guy. And a lot of the LinkedIn experts out there, they're marketers, and marketing is valuable. It's an industry, it's a business, it drives revenue, and it's valuable. But what I really do is LinkedIn selling, specifically LinkedIn prospecting. And as you said, you go to a networking event. So that's the connection. And then you got to cultivate that. So you create the relationship online, and you wish someone a happy birthday, and you congratulate them on the new job, and you comment on their content, and you share their content. And that's how you cultivate relationships.
Yeah. That's great. Baby with a bazooka. So at time of this recording, I have a 14-month-old daughter. And I just imagine putting a bazooka in her. She's like a human bazooka, a little mini human
Yes.
bazooka going around the house. It's a lot of fun watching, but I could only imagine you're right. That would not be good for anyone with as much as they get into stuff. So let's shift gears just a tad. If social selling is all the rage these days, its chief rival that is equally as polarizing a topic is cold calling. Right. And so I'd love to get your viewpoint on, is cold calling dead, like a lot of social selling pundits say? And if not, where is it useful? Where do you see it being useful? What's your viewpoint on cold calling in general?
Here's my opinion on cold calling. When I first got into telecom in 1999, I was a cold calling machine.
Mm-hmm.
I was very fortunate. The company I worked for had a Hoover subscription.
Mm-hmm.
And I blocked off Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I'd make 100 calls or more on a Tuesday and a Thursday. I'd get 3 or 4 appointments out of that blitz. And that would set up the appointments for Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I'd hit quota and I'd repeat. And then probably around 2005, most of that came to a screaming halt. And the big reason is twofold: caller ID and voicemail. People no longer had to answer their phone. And the moment they realize that they don't know who you are, they delete your message without listening. So when 100 phone calls used to generate 3 to 4 appointments, now 100 phone calls might get you an appointment every other time, if you're lucky. So cold calling is not dead, but it has changed. And I'll give you a great example. A few years ago, I was working for this small telecom company where I live in Carroll County. And the owner joined the local chamber. And he hands me the chamber directory and says, "Okay, Mike, I want you to call all these people and set appointments with them." I said, "Okay, boss." What I did was I looked up every person in the directory before I called them, to see if I had some connect, some mutual with them. And in particular, is this one gentleman, his name was Bob. His name still is Bob. And I noticed that he's connected to 2 people that I know really well. I call his office. Big surprise, the voicemail picks up. And I said, "Hi, Bob. My name is Mike Shelah. I'm a fellow member of the Baltimore County Chamber. And I took a look at your LinkedIn profile today, and I noticed that you are connected to George and Brad. Would love to know how you know them. They're both good friends of mine. Here's my phone number. Call me back when you have a chance." 10 minutes go by. Bob calls me back. Says, "Okay, Mike, how do you know George and Brad?" I said, "Well, George was my former employer, and I still have a very good relationship with him." And I said, "And Brad's my fraternity brother." He says, "Well, Mike, George just happens to be my business partner. I rent space from him. And Brad is my childhood best friend. When would you like to come in and meet?" Now notice, nowhere in that conversation did I say, "This is who I am and this is what I do."
Yeah.
He met with me simply on the credibility of the contacts.
Yeah. Yeah, I would call that a unique connection point, a UCP, right? So you found the unique connection point. One specific tactic is to look at who the mutual connections are, right?
Yep.
And reach out that way. You mentioned some other ones earlier on triggers or insights that you've gleaned through social research, social recon, if you will, right? And so reaching out and connecting with them on that. There's the more you think about that and the more you prepare for that, the more creative you can get, right? Because a lot of people can leverage, hey, we have mutual connections, but there's nothing that beats that. So there's no way to get more creative with, hey, I know Mike and whoever else, and I wanted to, I'm curious as to how you know them as well. There's no better connection point, because if the only difference is if he didn't know those 2 very well, right? Because a lot of times people just kind of connect on LinkedIn with people.
Yep.
Then you would be no worse off, because he wouldn't have replied to you and maybe on a cold call, just a standard run-of-the-mill cold call anyways. But there's a 50-50 opportunity there, especially if you list 2. You list 3 people, you move up your opportunity even more. But to where he knows at least one of them, right? And that piques his interest enough to want to get back to you in that specific example. So the more unique the connection point is, the higher the probability they're going to be open to at least having a discussion with you or meeting with you, right?
Yeah. And I take it a step further. I tell my clients, I say, don't call anybody that you don't know. Mm-hmm. So what I do is I create a content list on LinkedIn. I narrow it down to the job title. You know, in the technology world, you're dealing with the CIO, you're dealing with the director of IT, occasionally the CFO, occasionally the COO. Those are the big four. Mm-hmm. And there's a few other peripherals. But you can create a list of CIOs in your market that are second-degree connections, meaning they know at least one person that you know as well.
Yep.
And I look for the ones that have 5 mutual connections, 10 mutual connections, 20, 30. Mm-hmm. And what I'll do is I'll call each of those people and say, hey, Jim, I noticed on LinkedIn you're connected to Steve. How well do you know him? How do you recommend that I approach him? Should I send him an email? Should I send him a message through LinkedIn? Should I call him? You know, what is your experience level with him? And you're going to get one of 3 answers, essentially. You're going to get, I don't know. We just connected. Okay, well, do you mind introducing me? Because you know him better than I do. And then you get that one where they say, oh, yeah, I kind of know him. You know, we met at a cocktail party, or I saw him at a networking event a few months ago. But my favorites are the LinkedIn Gold, mm-hmm. where they say, do I know him? He was my college roommate. He was the best man in my wedding. He's my brother-in-law. Because that's almost a lock to get you the meeting. I got a meeting with the director of IT at McCormick Spice because I reached out to one of our mutual connections, and it turns out that was her cousin. And I said, Jim, do you mind introducing me to Mary? And he said, absolutely. Mary's my cousin. Happy to do it.
That's great. All right. Just taking some notes. I love that. The LinkedIn goal, one of 3 outcomes. Don't know them, know them vaguely, and a resounding yes. Do I know him? You know, that's my best friend, my childhood friend, my fraternity brother in the other example, or whatever it may be. So that is just awesome. We could go, you and I could go on and on and on, because it cues up so many other tactics and techniques that we could probably teach the audience. Hopefully, you know, for our audience listening and viewing right now, you're starting to, the wheels are spinning, the creative juices are flowing. You know, capture these ideas, write them down, and start executing them, right? So these are great ideas. If you're in the car, don't do that. You'll drive off the road. So wait till you hear this again. It's a podcast. You could replay it. But really sit down and think through, you know, what are the creative, unique connection points? Mike just outlined a great one on the mutual connections, especially if you have Sales Navigator. It's a much better search capability. They basically took all the premium search features from LinkedIn, put them in over there, and said, now you got to move your subscription. But nonetheless, that's another episode, so to speak. But do a search and narrow it down to just the second-degree connections. And now you've got a whole list in a block of time. You could start calling those connections that you know and asking them how they know that. In one of my free video email courses I've done and all that stuff, I walk through a concept called conducting a network sift. It's very similar to that.
Love it.
I take it another step further where I say make it easy for people to help you. So actually write out how you would want to be introduced, send it to them in an email. So they just copy, paste, maybe edit it to make it sound like themselves and send. Don't make it difficult for them to help you, right, and connect you with people, so that would kind of build upon your idea on that. So I am in lockstep with what you're saying, Mike, and we can go on and on. But for the sake of time, I do want to start to kind of wrap this up a little bit. So, you know, we're nearing the end of our time today, and that means one thing on the Sales Integrity Podcast. I kind of prepped you a little bit earlier. Before we recorded. That means it's time for the sales cycle, right? And the sales cycle is a very familiar term or phrase for those that are in the sales realm, if you will, in the sales profession. It's typically your step-by-step sales stages, process, guide a prospective customer through closure and then becoming a customer. But on the podcast, it's our format of the show, or the time of the show, where we go through rapid fire questions. There's 7 questions specifically. Because we know everyone is competitive in some form or fashion in the sales world, we time all of our guests on this. So I'm going to queue up the timer here on the old iPhone and time you. Right now, our current leader is a gentleman named Stu Schlackman, author of the book, 4 People You Should Know. He set the benchmark with a 1 minute and 55 second sales cycle. So
I think
just
that record is safe. I'm a talker.
so what you want to do is there's a balance here between speed and value, right? So don't
Mhm.
just answer them in one word answers for the 7 questions. I'm going to make you elaborate. So that's going to lengthen it anyways. You'll add unnecessary time. So make sure our audience can glean some value out of your answers here. But we're going to go through these 7 questions here. I'll ask them as fast as I typically do and give you the time to kind of answer them. I'll let you know we're on the last question, and then I'll stop the timer. So Mike, Shelah, are you ready for the sales cycle?
Heck yes.
All right. We're going to start the clock right now. Question 1, name a specific technology or tool you use for identifying and researching target market prospects.
I think we already talked about that. It's the content filters through LinkedIn. And sometimes you just got to use good old fashioned Google. And you want to make sure that you cross reference between Facebook, between Twitter. They're all on social selling platforms, but combine them to get maximum value.
Great. Question number 2, what is the best method, not necessarily just technology, but just method in general, to initially get the attention of and connect with your target market prospects?
I think the smartest thing you can do is get referred by someone that they know and they trust. I call that borrowing and leveraging trust.
Great. Love it. Question 3, what method do you use to consistently stay top of mind if your prospects aren't ready to buy just yet?
I love using the filters through LinkedIn. I love to wish people a happy birthday. I love to comment on their content. I love to share their content. Happy anniversary. Best of luck with the new job. You have all these different ways that you can touch people without saying, hey, you ready to buy? That allows you to stay relevant. Part of that comes from the relationship you built with them in the meeting. You should have gotten some things that weren't necessarily present in social, and you should be able to build on those things. Maybe it's a love of comic books or a love of a fellow baseball team, or it's a volunteer cause that you care about, and sharing those non-sales items to keep you in front of the sales items.
Great. And question number 4, we talked about sales funnel versus sales pipeline. So think more sales pipeline on this. What sales process methodology do you use to manage opportunities through the sales cycle?
I've never had a formal one. It's first about prospect, then it's about preparation, then it's about presentation, then it's about perspective. So we already talked about the prospecting piece. I think a lot of people really fall down on the preparation and the presentation. You talked about the preparation a little bit. Get to your meeting 15 minutes early. Give yourself the chance to catch your breath, go through the notes you're going to go through so that you are walking in there focused and calm and ready. And as for presentation, 90% of salespeople put almost no practice into presenting in front of an audience, and it shows. Go find a Toastmasters club. There's one within 10 miles of your house. It'll cost you $100 for the year, and you get the opportunity to practice presenting in front of an audience, and you get constructive feedback to make you better.
That's great. Question 5, how do you define the concept of closing a sale?
I don't. There is no such thing as a close. What you do is you walk through the sales process hand in hand with the customer's buying process, along with the customer's decision process. And if you make your number 1 job awareness of the customer's needs, and your number 2 job aligning the 3 processes, there is no close. The signed contract is the natural conclusion to the process.
So that might answer the next question 6. How do you know when it's time to close a sale for any given opportunity?
Interesting. You want smaller commitments along the way. And as much as anything, you have to say to yourself, have I earned the right to ask for this contract? Because a lot of times salespeople will ask before they've really earned the right, before they've really dotted all their I's and crossed all their T's. And the last check-in is to make sure, again, do I understand what the customer is asking for? Make sure that you're in alignment. And if you're getting yeses to all the alignment, then it's about, okay, well, great. Let's make this implement for you in the time frame that you want.
Yep. Last question. What is your best advice for sales achievers to improve their closing ratio?
Listen, listen, listen more. Once you have done that, make sure that you reframe what you've listened to so that the customer feels like you understand them.
Great. All right. Congrats. You've closed the deal. You've finished the sales cycle here. You closed the deal. You listen. So you ready for your time?
Yeah.
4 minutes and 36 seconds.
Yeah, I knew that record was safe.
It was safe, right? It was very good. You really leaned on the side of value. So I appreciate that. And let's wrap up the show now. What is your number one piece of advice? Keep in mind, our audience are typically, they're in the B2B sales professionals selling complex technical product, services, solutions. So for that audience, what would be your number one piece of advice for them?
Whatever you're doing for education now, double down. So if you're reading a book a month right now, make that objective 2 books a month. I make a point of reading 3 books at the same time. I do 10 pages per book, and I try to do that daily because I want to get different perspectives. I want to make sure that I'm hearing different ideas, and that's how you start to snap the puzzle together and see the big picture.
That's great. Double down on education. Love it. And finally, how can people best connect with you? So if you want to provide your website or any other contact info, now's the time to do it. How can our audience, if they wanted to reach out to Mike Shelah, how would they best connect with you?
Sure. I always say that I am very Googleable. Once you know how to spell my name, Shelah, I'm easy to find. Naturally, my website, MikeShelah.com. You can email me, Mike@MikeShelah.com. My phone number is 443-808-1670. And I'm across all the sales platforms. LinkedIn is where you will find me all the time. You will also find me on Twitter @MikeShelah. You'll find me on Instagram @MikeShelah. And you'll find my Facebook page, Mike Shelah Consulting.
That's great. Well, Mike, thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate it. And thank you to all the sales achievers out there, our loyal listeners who took the time to listen and or view today's interview. Really appreciate you as well. So let's end today, as we always do, with a few quick reminders. Real quick, before we end today's episode, I wanted to just share a few quick reminders with you. No matter where you listen to the Sales Integrity Podcast, please subscribe to it. Just subscribe to the show so you get them automatically on a weekly basis. The more subscribers we have, the more we're found out there by other potential subscribers, so that greatly helps the show. We are now on Stitcher Radio, so in addition to Stitcher, we're on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. And no matter where you subscribe or listen to us, please provide a 5-star rating and a quick 1 to 2 sentence review. That also helps others find the podcast. So help us grow the show. That would be great. And also, we still have our free 7-day video email course out there. You can go to mastercomplexselling.com to subscribe to that. So again, mastercomplexselling.com. It's a free 7-day video email course titled 7 Steps to Master the Game of Complex Technical Selling. So that'll do it for today. Go out there in the sales world today. Help your customers buy what they want, what they need, and what benefits them. And most importantly, go out there and make it a great day.